SCP-1730 is one of the biggest threats the Foundation has ever faced. SCP-1730 does not exist. It was June 5th when the compound was first discovered, a large complex of structures in rural Texas, about 15 kilometers northwest of the Mexican border, located in Big Bend Ranch State Park. It was easily the biggest structure in the area, but there was no record of any such structure ever being built. A massive network of power stations, containment facilities, and research buildings, SCP-1730 looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. The exterior was degraded, but the building was still operating. A power generator had been running for an indeterminate amount of time. Even as the infrastructure degraded, power flickered through the site and fuel leaked frequently, but there was one detail that attracted the attention of SCP brass. SCP-1730 bore identifying markings linking it to Foundation Site-13, a research facility that was marked for construction near Nome, Alaska. But Site-13 had never been built, having been abandoned in the planning stages. So why is it in the middle of Texas, fully constructed and long abandoned? The Foundation needed to know more, and they needed their best to investigate. It was time to call in the Game Wardens. Apollo 3, the mobile task force used to investigate dangerous sites, was brought in, and 5 elite agents were briefed and sent in: Ross, Houston, Noah, Ohalo, and Vigo. It didn't take long for them to discover that something was very wrong with the site of SCP-1730. The facility was located in the middle of South Texas, but the local flora surrounding it was native to Nome, Alaska. Something had transported a building that shouldn't exist to another place and time. Commander Ross ordered his men to enter, with Houston taking the lead. They discovered that the entry led down a long staircase. They descended slowly, following a strange light that no one could identify, but had a sudden shock when they discovered that the basement of the staircase was missing. The light suddenly stopped, and it became so dark that it was impossible to see what lay beyond the staircase. Upon probing the inky black void at the base of the staircase, they determined it wasn't a fog or shadow. It was a liquid, and it was rising. Ross ordered the men to pull back, but Houston was in too deep. He couldn't break free from the inky black liquid. The men pulled him away and got him free, but his legs were gone. Not ripped off because there was no blood anywhere, smoothly cut off, as if they were never there. And as they put Houston down, he stood up on phantom legs. He didn't feel any pain, but everyone could tell something was very wrong with this place. And the messages they started seeing on the wall made clear they weren't the only ones who knew it. What happened to Site-13? Death here. Not my body. Bleed. There had been other people or things inside SCP-1730, and they wanted anyone who entered to know that this was a very dangerous place to be. As they advanced down the hall back toward the entrance, they saw what looked like a person in the distance, but as they approached, it became clear it wasn't another explorer. It was an old, horribly disfigured corpse, seemingly attached to the wall, not by chains, but fused to the wall in unnatural ways. At first, the team seemed unconcerned, recognizing the corpse as someone named Zachary. Fortunately, command back at the base realized this as the effects of some sort of cognito hazard, a mental infection in the base. They uploaded a filter to their helmets, and the team recoiled in horror at the sight in front of them. But the horrors were just beginning. They turned around to see a shimmering humanoid entity in the hallway behind them. As it approached, its footsteps distorted the hallway around. It pulled AP3 Noah toward it without touching him, and as the soldier was pulled into its clutches, his body started to distort. Vigo was next, being grabbed by the arm by a long appendage, and his arm started to change color and distort. But the Foundation sent Apollo 3 in prepared. Houston produced a portable reality anchor designed to handle reality warping entities, and with a flash of red light, the creature was revealed. It was a horribly elongated humanoid that only existed for a second before the reality anchor erased it and restored the hallway to its normal state. Vigo would recover, with the strange red color in his arm fading eventually. Noah wasn't so lucky. He was already dead and had been fused into the wall just like the unfortunate corpse. These horrors had been encountered just by trying to return to the entrance, so it was clear the only smart thing to do was to descend further into the facilities and get some answers. As they advanced, not encountering any other supernatural entities, they saw more evidence of the dark things that had occurred in Site-13. The infirmary had been torn apart, a cafeteria had been melted into slag, and a large group of containment cells ended with a section called Olympia Class. But while most of the other cells were standard-sized, These were over 100 meters high. What had the Foundation, or whoever ran this place, been keeping in these cells? They would get more answers as they made their way down the hall, where they saw a single television still working and illuminating the hallway. At first, the television flickered, but the image soon cleared, and the agents were able to see what it was broadcasting. It was the interior of a containment cell, and there was someone in it, and they recognized them as one of the most dangerous beings contained by the SCP Foundation, Bobble the Clown, a predatory supernatural clown that inhabits a children's TV show. Bobble the Clown was broadcast by an unknown source and could only be seen by children under 10. Originally seeming to be a normal kids show about a clown, every episode eventually devolved into the murderous Bobble teaching kids how to do horrible things like arson and torture. The Foundation eventually captured and isolated Bobble's broadcast, but the clown remained hostile and vicious. But not here. As the team talked to the Bobble trapped in the mysterious Site-13, it became clear that this clown was broken by whatever it had experienced. It rambled, it hid from the camera, and it was clearly terrified as it told the team about the horrors of the site, and it seemed to recognize the agents as something familiar, but not completely familiar. It claimed to be able to smell them, and it said they smelled different. As Bobble rambled on, the agents learned about a man named Emerson who ran the site. Like the Foundation, he was obsessed with containing the strange and dangerous entities in the world. But unlike the Foundation, he didn't just want to protect the world from them. He hated them. The entities in Site-13 didn't even have numbers. Emerson wanted to use them up however he wanted and to dispose of them. And something Bobble called the meat grinder. Entities that outlived their usefulness were taken down below and none were ever heard from again. It was directly counter to every SCP Foundation policy, but this site had clearly been performing these horrible experiments for years. How? And why hadn't anyone heard of it? The team continued to make their way into the facility, but their signals were lost as they entered the cryogenics unit. By the time contact had been restored, they were no longer alone. There were survivors, both agents of the Foundation and survivors of the facility, and they were angry. With no way out and massively outnumbered, they called for backup. Mobile Task Force T5, also known as Samsara, was reserved for the heavy-duty missions. They're an elite group of practically immortal cyborgs fashioned from the flesh of a god and equipped with further cybernetic enhancements to eliminate Keter-level threats and to protect themselves from cognito hazards. They were sent in through a drainage gate to look for survivors and neutralize whatever lay within. They didn't know what to expect, but they knew one thing: no one who had been sent in had come out. It wasn't long before they realized how dangerous this mission would be. As they came across some large gated drainage pipes, they could see at least 20 charred bodies of humanoids pushed up against the gate, some reaching their hands through. Whatever had happened in Site-13, these unfortunate beings had been desperate to escape. As they made their way down the drainage pipe, they could feel it getting hotter, as if they were nearing an energy source. And there was one other odd thing about the pipe. It was draining inward, not out. They made their way into a control room where many of the consoles had been destroyed. Looking through a window, their view was obscured by a mysterious black mass. On the control panels, they could read terms like incinerator and body pit access. They split up trying to find answers, but found many of their accesses blocked by the black mass. As the T5 task force argued over their next move, they were startled by a sudden jolt. The giant mass had started moving. The team watched as the mass spun, revealing a giant turbine, which turned the inky substance into a fine slurry that was then scorched by giant streaks of fire. One of the T5 shot open the glass chamber, allowing the team to get closer and blasting them with a wave of heat. As they descended into the chamber, they could see a massive plant-like structure overhead, which started to shake. Suddenly, thousands of glowing pods were released from the massive plant, and each one lit up and let the team view the chamber more clearly. But it was what was inside the pods that was more disturbing. Each pod had a humanoid shape inside, seemingly reaching toward the team until they hit the slurry below and the shadows went dark. The team descended to investigate the slurry when something started to leak out of the walls. Looking at it, they could see something moving within. One of the team members picked up the wriggling object out of the black liquid and it took a bite of his hand. It was a leech, and there were thousands more of them moving toward the slurry, consuming it. and as the leeches ate, they started growing. They seemed to be moving in unison, communicating with a larger being lurking at the base of the slurry. A larger leech, a queen, or something else? The team wasn't sticking around to find out. They beat a hurried escape from the leech room, finding themselves in another hallway. Whatever the black substance was, the entities who had been here had used it, scrawling blood on the walls over and over again. Occasionally, they would come across a drained corpse covered in the black fluid. Had the leeches bled them dry? The facility was so sprawling that the team knew if they wanted any chance of navigating it safely, they needed to get the lay of the land. They needed to find the control center. The door read stairs to cryonics, and the leeches were nowhere to be found. It seemed like a safe path, but as soon as the team entered, the temperature dropped drastically to well below where it would be safe for a human to survive. The team's internal heating system kicked in to save their lives, but it wasn't the only threat. The team was about to encounter exactly what Site-13 was keeping locked up. As soon as they entered the room, sound ceased to work. The filters in their gear were overloaded, and the team saw warnings around the room. Silence. Don't look. A massive, multi-limbed figure emerged, with each of its 60 arms moving independently. The creature had no head, but a large circular structure covered with ancient glowing symbols. Whatever it was ancient, all-powerful, and deadly. The team scrambled to get away as the glyphs on the creature burned white-hot. Anyone who touched it was burned. Anyone who looked too long at it felt their optical implants burn out. The symbols on the creature were indecipherable, but one word was clear and printed in English: Emerson. Site-13 was from another world, another timeline where the SCP Foundation evolved into something horrible, ruled over by Elliot Emerson. It tortured and captured its beings and eventually killed most of them in the horrors of the incinerators. When an escape threatened to destroy the facility, Emerson successfully activated a device that removed the facility from their world into ours. Of course, as any avid follower of the SCP Foundation will know, there's far more to the story than this. Emerson may have been the start of Site-13's problems, but he was far from the end. It's the mission of the century, a daring rescue into the depths of one of the most dangerous locations in the multiverse, Site-13, otherwise known as SCP-1730. When the impossible Site-13 was first discovered, multiple mobile task forces were sent to plumb its depths, and none returned. They were greeted to a labyrinthine nightmare, littered with deadly cognitohazards, escaped SCPs, and mysterious, murderous leeches. Some were trapped along with the civilians they were sent to rescue. Others were killed or changed in unimaginable ways. Mobile Task Force Apollo 3, also known as the Game Wardens, had been sent in on a rescue mission when they encountered a horrifying sight: the captured broadcast of Bobble the Clown, a dangerous SCP known for corrupting and destroying children through its deadly messages. But this Bobble was different. Much like everything from Site-13, this Bobble came from an entirely different dimension, and he had terrifying information to relay. In the universe where Site-13 originated, the site's psychopathic director, one Elliot Emerson, had struck a deal with the Global Occult Coalition, a controversial government group who intends to protect humanity by killing anomalies rather than containing them. Emerson had converted his site into an unethical, unrestrained slaughterhouse and was incinerating SCPs by the hundred in a so-called body pit. But Emerson's game of death came back and bit him, snapping the threads of reality and turning the entire site into a dimensionally displaced super anomaly. The Game Wardens realized they were in way over their heads. Their chances of surviving this place were dropping by the second, and if they wanted any chance of succeeding in their mission, they needed backup. So Site Command called in MTF Tau 5, aka Samsara. Calling in Samsara for a run-of-the-mill collection mission is like using a bazooka to kill a housefly. But for a case as severe as 1730, their skills were not only nice to have, but vital. Samsara are among the best of the best, immortal cybernetic clones forged from the flesh of a god, equipped with weaponry and technology that could surpass even that of other elite Mobile Task Force units. The 4 members of Samsara are so adept at what they do, they earned the nickname Power Rangers among their peers. The remaining Game Wardens knew that with Samsara on the case, they may actually survive this thing after all, and they just needed to hold out. Samsara arrived on site not long after, packing some serious technological heat, including arm-mounted incendiary cannons, shock-absorbing leg extensions, heat-resistant plating, and built-in scramble adaptations within their eyes to ward off the deadly cognitohazards. Everyone involved was in for the fight of their lives. The 4 Samsara agents, Irantu, Nanku, Munru, and Onru, entered via a drainage gate in one of the office buildings above ground and began their descent inside. After observing numerous charred bodies, they deduced that there must have been a massive incinerator somewhere on site. Emerson's incinerator, TheRubber, theorizing that this was connected to the body pit they kept hearing about, they descended further, feeling the temperature rise as they did so. Due to the anomalous nature of 1730, nothing inside made any kind of logical sense. Caused by a reality-warping machine known as TheRubber, the internal geography of Site-13 was subject to constant shifts. The team then split up to cover more ground. Munro and Nanku continued to follow the pipes and the heat toward the furnace, while Irantu and Onru broke away to explore what lay beyond a weak wall. After busting through the wall, Irantu and Onru explored several empty office blocks before finding their way into a control room with a glass observation deck. While the window was obscured by garbage and human corpses, signage indicated that the incinerator and the body pit were directly below them. The team once again reconvened and managed to activate the incinerator, which shredded the mass stuck inside with several large turbines before burning the resulting slurry, the same process that had happened to so many anomalies under Emerson's watch. With the path cleared, Samsara decided to descend via the incinerator, using the drainage pipe as a kind of makeshift tunnel. Eventually, they happened upon the leeches, large, black, and hungry. These creatures seemed to infest 1730 by the thousand. Anywhere that blood or drainage runoff could be found, the leeches could be found too. They didn't appear to have any connection to an anomaly previously secured and contained by the Foundation. They squeezed and wriggled through the cracks in the walls, searching for fresh blood. Onru detected that the leeches all moved with a kind of collective purpose, suggesting a telepathic hive mind. Onru was able to tap into this hive mind using her cybernetic enhancements and map the chaotic geography of 1730 through the leech colony's collective knowledge. With this new advantage, they could add a second goal to this rescue mission: find the TheRubber device causing all the instability and potentially reduce power to it if possible. But they were on the clock to save the other survivors, as those leeches were sure to get hungry for warm blood soon. They followed the leeches down the most direct path toward the survivors. On the way, they encountered a horrifying creature, the many-limbed humanoid nightmare that functions as Emerson's eternal punishment, his charred body tied screaming and alive to the platform where the monster's head should be. They managed to make it past the monster before finally rendezvousing with Captain Hollis of Mobile Task Force Zeta 9, otherwise known as the Mole Rats, as well as the game wardens and the other survivors. There were 27 surviving members of Site-13 staff, many of which had severe injuries, making it even harder to transport them back to safety through the hazardous terrain. And to make matters worse, the leeches were back. The team quickly decided that the best route out of here was directly past the TheRubber, where they could reduce power to the machine for just long enough to create a stable path of escape. Nanku opened fire on a horde of approaching leeches with a flamethrower, and everyone began running for their lives. It was a final make-or-break dash to safety. However, their advance was soon stopped by a strange robed creature drawing a cognitohazardous meme on the wall with its claws. When the team attempted to engage, it attacked, exposing additional deadly memes and the dangerous effects of its single white eye. And we're not talking about internet memes here. These are symbols and information that are often deadly to even bear witness to, and for you or I, this would be a real threat, but not to a team equipped with goggles containing cognitohazard filter technology. The battle was cut short when the floor collapsed underneath them and the creature was devoured by something even larger and more monstrous, a gigantic black leech covered in huge red eyes. Its entrance caused thousands of leeches to spill out into the hall as the monster screeched and slithered its tentacles after them. Allow us to introduce you to Elijah, also known as the Leech Boy, and a pivotal component of the very existence of SCP-1730. He was a boy with the mind of a toddler, but he had the strange ability to absorb blood through people's skin, hence his nickname Leech Boy. One of the doctors in Site-13, Dr. Hadley, took pity on Elijah. After all, he didn't choose to be the way he was. Director Emerson didn't share Hadley's sympathy. His orders to exterminate all anomalies included humanoids like Elijah. When Hadley protested, Emerson had her beaten within an inch of her life while other dissenters were shot. Dr. Hadley, disgusted by the inhumanity of her superiors, devised the perfect revenge. She sabotaged the incinerator and the body pit, allowing a mass containment breach that flooded the site with deadly anomalies. Young Elijah ended up consuming the slurry of the other shredded anomalies, causing him to mutate into a powerful monster, a behemoth of a leech who gave birth to and controlled all the others. It was Hadley's revenge that caused Emerson to panic and activate TheRubber, leading to a rift in reality and the creation of 1730, and by extension, all the problems faced by our heroes today. Samsara and the others fled Leech Boy and began taking a different escape route. However, while en route, they encountered the dreaded crystal butterflies, a dangerous SCP capable of destroying organic matter with a mere touch. Irantu stepped up to bat, roasting the creatures with his arm-mounted incinerator and taking extreme damage to his body in the process. But they didn't have time to rest. With the butterflies disposed of, they kept moving, heading toward the Thresher. But not all the SCPs were necessarily working against them. Bobble the Clown came in handy at the next checkpoint, manifesting in the monitor of an electronic door and opening the way through. As they continued on their journey, they had to fight off frequent attacks from leeches, losing some of the task force members in the process. They were also forced to face off against a number of other anomalies in order to survive, such as SCP-2316, manifesting as floating bodies beneath them, and SCP-1370, which used a huge mechanized body to attack the team of survivors. That was all just a warm-up for the true final battle, though. The floor shattered beneath them, and out of an impossibly huge chamber, the monster that had once been Elijah wriggled free, reaching for them with huge tentacles and shrieking from its thousand-toothed maw. It was at least 200 meters tall and barely reacted to any amount of firepower. It seemed like they were all doomed until Captain Hollis had a truly crazy idea. With the help of Samsara, she led the bloodthirsty abomination down through the cryonic center and into an Olympia-class testing chamber. There, as the Leech Boy was bearing down on them, Hollis opened the gates to two adjacent containment cells, and something beyond incredible happened. Two of the most powerful SCPs ever known, a giant sword-wielding gate guardian and the reality-bending cosmic deer, SCP-2845, entered the arena. What followed was one of the most epic showdowns in the history of the SCP Foundation, as the deer and the gate guardian went to battle against the all-devouring leech. While the monsters fought, Hollis ordered her team to get the rest of the survivors to safety. She and Munru of the Samsara team remained behind to prevent any of the anomalies from escaping, as the entire base began sinking into the ground from the combined forces of the battle raging around them and the Thresher's continued onslaught on reality. Even if the survivors escaped, would the anomalous developments inside Site-13 escape and wreak havoc on the world at large? That's when Hollis received a vision. A horrific, charred, post-apocalyptic world roamed by inconceivably powerful entities and nightmare gods. It was a vision so horrific that just seeing it nearly broke her mind. She knew what she had to do. The only way she could truly defeat this terrible place and ensure safety for mankind. While Leech Boy, the Gate Guardian, and the Deer continued their battle for the ages, Hollis ran to Thresher and forced the machine into overdrive. Up above, the remaining members of Samsara, the Mole Rats, and the Game Wardens escorted the survivors to safety. Downstairs, Thresher emitted a blinding white light as the system began overload. In her final moments, all Hollis could do was laugh. Perhaps it was a laugh of pure insanity, of a mind broken by the horror she witnessed. Or perhaps it was a laugh of victory, knowing that in spite of the immense powers all around her, she had won the day. She had saved not only the survivors and her teammates, but possibly all of humanity. And all it cost her was everything. Outside, the survivors had reached a safe distance away when the entirety of Site-13 imploded in a final brilliant flash. When the dust cleared, SCP-1730 was gone. All that was left was an immense crater where the impossible base should have once been. Captain Hollis had done it. Through overloading the Thresher machine, she'd taken this anomaly out of the world the exact same way it had entered. It was torn from its moorings on our Earth and kicked into the infinity of space-time, perhaps never to be seen again, along with everything it contained. SCP-1730 was reclassified to neutralized. Of course, the Foundation would have plenty of other anomalies to pursue soon after, but the nightmare of Emerson's Site-13 was over once and for all. A light shines above a metal table with a chair positioned on either side. This is the isolated, hermetically sealed interview chamber of Provisional Site-23. Outside the room waits two shell-shocked human mobile task force members, another with invisible ghost legs, three powerful cyborgs, and a scientist from another dimension. They're all here to talk about one thing: the nightmare that unfolded at Site-13. Also known as SCP-1730. Everyone thinks they know the story. A mysterious site suddenly appears in Texas, seeming to exactly match the blueprint for an abandoned site that's supposed to be in Nome, Alaska. What started as a simple anomalous location turned out to be an epic horror from another dimension. The task forces sent in by the Foundation were either massacred or trapped inside, and those who survived reported seeing unspeakable carnage inside the base, including a death machine designed to destroy anomalies. And that's not all. As a result of the mysterious Thresher machine, the entire location had been transformed into a shifting spatial anomaly filled with creatures straight out of a nightmare, from giant telepathic leech monsters to huge multi-limbed demigods that would eternally punish the site's murderous director, Elliot Emerson. It was only through the combined might of 3 different mobile task forces, including the legendary Samsara and the sacrifice of brave Captain Hollis, that the cursed location was finally flung into a different dimension, neutralizing the threat it posed to our reality. But for the SCP Foundation, the story doesn't end with neutralization. There's still plenty more questions that need answering, and that's why today we're going to tell you what they found out after the neutralization of SCP-1730. Not only will we discover what's become of the many people involved, we'll learn about what happened in the last moments before the neutralization took place, and perhaps most importantly of all, for the sake of our universe, we'll find out how Site-13 came into existence and how Site Director Emerson went down such a dark path. It's time to get some answers. Welcome to the final part of the SCP-1730 saga, as we close the book on one of the most deadly locations in the Foundation multiverse. First to sit down in the interview chair was Captain Ephraim Ross, leader of the Mobile Task Force Apollo 3, also known as the Game Wardens. He was a shaken man, looking far older than his 35 years, his eyes heavy with the weight of the horrors he'd seen. And he and his team were among the first to venture into the bowels of Site-13 and witness the atrocities that had gone down there, like the body pit full of fleshy slurry, or the countless containment chambers that marked their occupants for vivisection and termination. Captain Ross was haunted by the things that happened to his team under his watch, as the anomalous transformation of Houston's legs and the nightmarish warping death of Noah at the hands of a stretchy, reality-bending anomaly. He compared the state of chaos going on down there to something like Jurassic Park, where all hell had broken loose and the monsters ruled. He also remarked on the Olympia containment cells, each the size of a football stadium, capable of containing things far beyond the scope of this universe's SCP Foundation. His interviewer was the hard-nosed Dr. Peter Vincent, who thanked Captain Ross for his contributions and called in the next interview subject, Agent Liam Ohalo, a Game Warden's task force member working under Captain Ross. He had a 1,000-yard stare, and even the untrained observer could see that Agent Ohalo had left some parts of himself back in Site-13. When Dr. Vincent attempted to interview him, he mostly remained silent, only volunteering one grim statement: "We should have died in there. This isn't real. This isn't real. We were supposed to die in there." Next to be interviewed was Captain Irantu of Mobile Task Force Tau 5, aka Samsara. His interviewer, Dr. Isha St. Clair, questioned him about the nature of the mission, and the cybernetic soldier was even keeled about the matter. He said that in spite of regrettable losses of life, he was still satisfied with the outcome of the mission overall. The high-value targets were rescued, the anomaly was for all intents and purposes neutralized, and the degree of loss was actually better than their pre-mission predictions. It seems that the weight of death doesn't weigh quite as heavily on those who will probably never have to experience it, as the Samsara team are capable of simply being rebooted into new bodies if terminated in the field. People like Captain Hollis weren't as lucky. Next, Agent Cotter Houston of the Game Wardens was both interviewed and medically evaluated by Dr. Ian Harris. Agent Houston had his legs dematerialized after he tripped into a rising tide of anomalous liquid, which he described as looking like a moving physical computer glitch. However, in spite of this, Agent Houston is still able to stand and move of his own free will. It seemed to Dr. Harris that Houston's legs were somehow trapped between dimensions. Houston told Dr. Harris that he didn't experience any kind of pain when his legs were removed, but to this day he occasionally feels something furry brushing up against them. Perhaps wherever his legs are, they aren't alone. Next, the stoic Agent Munru of Samsara was interviewed by Captain Elliot O'Neill of Mobile Task Force D-26, also known as Time Cops. Captain O'Neill had a bone to pick with Munru, namely that he'd allow Captain Hollis to run off and sacrifice her own life despite having a clear directive to prevent the human task force members from endangering themselves at any cost. Munru deflected, claiming that when Hollis separated from the group, he assumed that she ran off with intentions that never included her own demise. O'Neill and the Foundation found this answer unsatisfying and decided to move on to their next interview with Onru, the last person with Captain Hollis before her death. The interviewer, Dr. Darian Arnold, probed the elite Samsara operative on why she turned off her camera before she and Hollis reached the Thresher, the machine that Hollis overloaded to annihilate Site-13 from our dimension. She gave a more compelling answer than Munro. When she and Hollis entered the server room on the way to the Thresher, they encountered what might have been the ultimate cognito hazard. It was a vision of a terrifying alternate dimension with billions dead. A poisoned star like the biblical wormwood fell from the burning sky, A nightmare god like the one torturing Elliot Emerson wandered along the fields of crucified people covered in deadly cognitohazardous runes. Just looking at it burned the scramble technology out of Moonru's eyes, and she quickly turned off her cameras to avoid potentially frying the brains of Mission Control. Hollis wasn't so lucky. The things she witnessed broke her sanity, and when she finally overloaded the thresher machine, she was laughing and crying. Finally, in perhaps the most enlightening debriefing interview of them all, Site Director William Vesterlin interviewed Dr. Muhammad Scott, the highest-ranking researcher of Site-13 and confidant of the now infamous director Elliot Emerson. The question was simple: just what had happened for Site-13 to become so messed up? And Dr. Scott answered in detail with a tale of corruption, alternate realities, and the perils of unchecked power. In his home dimension, Site-13 was originally created in Nome, Alaska to house the corpse of a giant sea creature that beached itself on the border of India and Bangladesh in 1964. It became the largest and most secretive Foundation containment facility in the latter half of the 20th century. However, disaster struck in 1994 when a Marxist extremist used an anomaly to level the Willis Tower in Chicago. As a result, the Foundation lost a lot of its funding and international support, leaving it in dire financial straits. Enter the true villain of the Site-13 story, Paul Manafort. If that name sounds familiar to you, it's because he was an associate of President Trump in our universe who got into legal trouble for shady international dealings. However, in Dr. Scott's universe, he was a powerful staffer for President Bob Dole, who in that reality had beaten Bill Clinton in the 1996 presidential election. Manafort was made the new Secretary General of the Global Occult Coalition, the UN's answer to the SCP Foundation, and one of their leading competitors, with an ethos geared toward killing rather than containing anomalies. Manafort and the GOC co-opted the struggling Foundation, providing them with money in exchange for control. The Foundation had no choice but to accept the deal with the devil. Slowly, Manafort replaced the Foundation old guard with toadies and loyalists. The Ethics Committee and the O5 Command were dismantled. Dissenters were dragged out of their offices and shot point-blank in the head execution style. Site-13 had originally been directed by Dr. Bright, but Bright was arrested and contained under false pretenses, so Manafort could install a new director, a mid-level researcher by the name of Elliot Emerson. Emerson is often painted as a sadistic monster who took pleasure in torturing anomalies to death and flushing them down the body pit. The reality is both simpler and more grim. Emerson, it turns out, was just an eager yes man. He was put into his position to follow Manafort's orders to a T, and those orders were simple: kill. In a perfect example of the banality of evil, Dr. Emerson converted Site-13 into a brutal slaughterhouse, just as his overlords at the GOC had ordered him. But things were quickly getting out of hand, and one of the most vocal critics of the new regime was one of Emerson's old lovers, one Dr. Vera Hadley, Assistant Director of Anomalous Biology. Dr. Hadley was disgusted by the inhuman acts Emerson was carrying out and couldn't stay silent, and for this she faced horrific consequences. Corrupt guards stripped her and beat her to within an inch of her life in front of her co-workers. In that moment, she swore her revenge. She sabotaged the containment procedures and had the engineers rig the already unstable thresher device to overload. As Emerson watched the anomalies break containment, he began to fear for his life, both from the anomalies themselves and from the punishments of his superiors at the GOC. Dr. Scott revealed that Emerson was no evil mastermind. He was a lapdog for the GOC, a dirty coward all the way to the very end, and he was desperate. He held Dr. Scott at gunpoint and ordered him to activate the thresher or die, and the rest is history. There would be no redemption for Dr. Scott's former friend, as Emerson ended up chained to the rune-covered platform head of a nightmare god for all eternity. So ends the debriefing of the Site-13 survivors, and closes the book on that terrible place, for now anyway. The story of SCP-1730 is anything but simple, and there are so many angles from which this dark tragedy of cruelty and corruption can be approached, and ultimately, it was all for the same two things at the root of every evil: the desire for money and power. But the pursuit of these base desires can lead to some truly nightmarish consequences, and nobody knows this better than former director Elliot Emerson, who will be paying for these sins until the end of time, and perhaps even beyond. Now go check out another epic tale from the SCP Foundation, SCP-5000, The Suit.